Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let me just do a quick introduction for all our participants here. Yeah. So I just want to welcome everyone again to our event, our Founders Club with Mr. Amrish Nair, who's the co-founder and CEO of Biorithm. So I'll just like to acquaint everyone here with the functions to be able to allow you to interact with Mr. Nair. So if you would like to use the Q&A tab to type in your questions, that can be found on the right column, and we'll be actually filtering through the most relevant or upvoted ones to be asked first. Also, do note that priority will be given to the participants who would like to raise your hand, and that function can actually be found at the bottom of your screen. So when you raise your hand, you'll be able to come up on stage to ask your question, as we want to make this session as interactive as possible. Yeah, so now with the admin issues out of the way, so back to the main program. So tonight's session is our last Founders Club, and I hope that for our participants who have attended our previous Founders Club, you have found the session very enriching. And so our guest tonight is Mr. Amrish Nair, the co-founder and CEO of Biorithm. And so we really want to thank you for joining us tonight. So maybe before we take any questions on the floor, we could go through some of our primer questions first.
Sure.
So do you want to like kind of run us through your company and what are the kind of gaps that you actually seek to address? Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for having me, and it's always a pleasure to share our story and share the journey. So I'm the co-founder of Biorithm, and we started off as a spin-off of NTU, and I think that was really it really influenced the way the company developed. And I started off as a grad student, and then left halfway. The cliches are true. Left halfway to actually start this up, and together with my professor and a collaborator. And we have really been on a roller coaster journey since then. I mean, a couple of hard pivots, but at the end of the day, we really wanted to provide accessible healthcare for all. And I think that was the real goal, and where we could use our skills in data science and signal processing to achieve that. And I think that was really the driving factor. And looking at the problems that were available, maternal and fetal health was something that was a little bit more greenfield, I would have to say. It was not so vogue back then. And we felt that it was an area we could really make an impact from patient to provider. And that was really what drove us. And I think till this day, we are the result of all our experiences, including our failures. And we have now built a system that is able to be the remote monitoring platform of choice for the OBGYN or women's health departments in hospitals, including sensors, mobile app, analytics. And so it's been quite a journey, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for just bringing us to that. I think like when you talked about the graduate students trophy, I think like that's something that a lot of people would face, right? I mean, going to research field and then like moving out of it to, and I think like that kind of like entrepreneurship startup journey is definitely something that I think not only yourself but a lot of our startup founders have also found themselves repeating the same story as well. Yeah, so maybe with respect to like this new technology in a sense, and I think like you're kind of a pioneer in this field, especially in Singapore, right? In terms of having a very new kind of wearable technology that is portable as well, and being kind of outside the hospital sphere. So maybe you could share with us like how do you actually work with stakeholders such as hospitals to kind of make your technology more accessible to pregnant women, or what kind of strategies do you use to actually bring your technology to commercialization once you actually prove like the proof of function?
Yeah, we're relentless, so we just wear everyone down until they work with us. But I think it's really about understanding that we are one piece of the solution, and it's about involving people in the process. And I think one of the earliest stories, I think, on how we developed this, and so we came into the company having signal processing knowledge, like advanced signal processing knowledge on healthcare data, on communications data. But applying it to the medical world was slightly different, right? You know, someone once said, and very wisely so, that once you've aligned all the motivation, 90% of the work is done. The rest are just details. And when you have a technology, you have not aligned a single thing yet, because you have your patient, your payer, your provider, patients' families, and the broader ecosystem of the other healthcare providers around that patient as well. And there's no substitute for actually being in the hospital to experience what the patients go through when they're receiving care, being part of those patient conversations with their doctors, and understanding not just what they're receiving, but how it could be better. And I think that's usually the hardest journey for anyone. We always think incrementally, but we never think from the ground up, basically. A very Elon Musk principle of going back to basics, right? And it's really when you identify the true problems that you can solve them. It's not about making a process 2% better, 3% better. It's really about thinking that this is a problem, or this is the way it's been done for 5 years, but why is it being done this way? So I was very fortunate to have a good secondary school buddy of mine who was a doctor in Melbourne who wanted to do a PhD. So he did a PhD on our wearable device, a very early prototype. So we cobbled together something, and we got ethics approval to go to Monash and actually monitor women monitor women for their fetal heart rate. And so for the first 2 years, I was in Melbourne maybe half the year. And all that time was not spent whining and dining or at the casino. I spent brutal weekends in the hospital, just sitting in this one women's monitoring room, speaking to patients, placing the device on patients, getting their feedback, understanding their concerns, understanding their fears. During lunch, you would talk to the midwives. So it was really nothing that could substitute that. It was really the foundations of my knowledge. It was very humbling work, but it was those foundations that really laid the path for us in the next few years. So people think it's all glamour, right? You build AI models and it's all very glitzy and glammy, but I think just mapping processes and getting to the root of the problem is something so fundamental for designing and developing technology that people forget that.
Yeah, I think like that especially that challenge is definitely something that's facing all our teams as well, which is I guess why we are also holding this session, for them to really understand the importance of needs gathering and validating their kind of whether their solution is really something that will provide tangible benefit in terms of the problem areas that they're covering. So like maybe like because you've kind of talked about the challenges that you kind of face, like I mean in terms of having to really transplant yourself to another country altogether to really conduct your needs research. But was there like any other challenges that you've actually faced in terms of once you actually now you have your idea, you come back to Singapore, like is there any like issues or barriers that you have actually faced in terms of being able to bring that product to the market, like what you have right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're building something new, right? And we're building for a problem that we anticipated that would be there in 2 to 3 years. We're not building for a problem that existed there and then, but we're building for a problem that was building up. And so it really also, it's from the fact that you talk to visionary people, visionary doctors, and they would issue a problem statement. I want a virtual maternity ward. Then it becomes your problem to figure out how, right? So I love these visionary guys. They lay it out. It sounds so cool, and then when you finally go back and wonder, like, how am I supposed to do that? And so it's about proving that you can achieve that to all the stakeholders. and making sure that you're not ignoring any of the stakeholders. So building the technology, I would say it's not really the hardest part, but technology is one part of the product. There's the point of usability by the different stakeholders. Can it be used in the way it's intended? Does it actually solve the problem it's intending to solve? Does it have any unintended consequences? I think that's one of the hardest parts. And I mean, a very clear example is remote monitoring in fetuses. You go to a hospital, you have the luxury of having a doctor or a midwife sit next to you and be able to physically examine you. If they see something wrong, it's something they can check on immediately. But when you remotely monitor someone, there is no doctor, there is no midwife. You are the data, you are the context around the monitoring. And so how do you develop a contextual monitoring session? And how do you utilize the data to make sure that the doctor knows when to call the patient back? Because the whole point is to keep the patient at home. But if they keep calling the patient back because they're unsure, it defeats the purpose. And so it's really about thinking it through from the acquisition to the analysis to the visualization of the data and information. It's such a challenge that only can be solved iteratively, I believe, over the course of a few years of product development. And in healthcare, we do not have the luxury of releasing a product we're embarrassed about. So we need to be able to anticipate risks and design for those risks. And that was really such a challenge. It goes against the way I thought as an academic, right? And it was so free as an academic. I could paint the prettiest picture, right, in a paper. But here we're facing harsh realities, and designing for the reality was the hardest part.
I mean, like when you talk about like designing for the reality, I'm kind of reminded of the differences between like when as you said, like you can plan as well as you can, but ultimately what people actually want, I mean, you brought an anecdote about a doctor who was saying like they paint like a broad stroke, like they want the best possible idea that you can possibly deliver to them. I mean, like I wanted to know, like actually, which is more challenging? Like, was it like actually like trying to match what people wanted on the ground, or was it actually like just trying to bring it out to be workable? Like, actually, which was tougher? Like, would you have wanted to? You said that you wanted to. You won't want to bring out something that you are embarrassed about, right? But there's also that kind of window in which you want to maximize, you want to make sure that you hit the problem statement, you want to hit the problem area just when the need is the greatest.
So as a co-founder, all those problems become your problems. So so you have a finite amount of money, you have a finite amount of resources. Product development's expensive, mistakes are expensive. You're only allowed a few mistakes before you actually run out of money. And like they say, right, everyone's got a plan until you're punched in the face, right? So it's, trials don't work. Your proof of concept trials fail. You have to go back and redo it all over again. So as a first-time founder, these things don't strike you immediately. The thought of failure, you feel like you're Superman when you start something, or Superwoman. But the thought of failure, all these cliches of people say you have to fail fast, fail quickly. It sounds ridiculous when you start. But when you're in it, you realize how true it is actually. And it's about those big bets. And the founders who succeed are the ones who make the big bets in the right directions. Very unfortunately, many people don't make the right bets in the right directions, but they were brave enough to make them in the first place. So it's a lot of unknowns ahead of everyone. Product development, you can't make everyone happy. Who do you make unhappy? Who is this? Who can you sacrifice? What feature do you want to remove so that we can release the product 3 months earlier? When do you start the clinical trial? knowing that your product is about 90% of the way there. Which partner do you go for in a clinical trial? Do you do it in Singapore? Do you do it in the UK? Do you do it in the US? At some point, the founders have to make decisions, and you live and die by those decisions. So that is the challenge, I would say. That is the real challenge that faces anyone who starts up. But it's exhilarating. It's a very thrilling ride. So thrilling can get tiring after a few years, but you find new thrills after a few years. So
Yeah, I mean, talking about the unknown, right? And I mean, like we're kind of living in the biggest unknown for like quite a while so far, right? I mean, you talk about the COVID pandemic. I guess it probably has thrown a lot of new challenges your way, but I mean, in a way, also like that, the COVID pandemic has kind of promoted this whole thing about digital health and remote monitoring, which I mean, like your solution has kind of fallen squarely in the right time, right place. So I was thinking, has actually the COVID pandemic actually kind of given you new opportunities rather than kind of presented a challenge?
you're correct, because the biggest hurdle that we were facing before was the psyche of the doctor and the midwife. They believed that there was nothing wrong with the system. So, because pregnancy can largely be seen from the lens of it is not a disease. It's something that you require care for. A percentage of women do get afflicted with conditions and different pathologies, and the fetuses sometimes suffer from different conditions. But as a whole, it is not a disease. What we monitor for is risk, and we monitor for the risk of these things occurring. And because these things are rarer than other populations, when it does happen, it's quite tragic and usually very emotionally. It's very emotionally burdensome. So it's really about the fact that COVID now forced doctors to consider remote monitoring as a choice. And now they've found that outcomes don't change, whether the patient goes to them or whether they've designed a hybrid care model. A big study in Monash found that outcomes didn't change. So it cost less and patients were doing just fine. So now we've proven that, what, it works and the doctors believe it works. They had no reason to do this on a large scale before. And that's what COVID did. It pushed them to do this on a large scale, to experiment with a light touch teleconsultation, maybe give them a blood pressure monitor. And that's what really broke the mindset. And I believe the doctors weren't wrong. They're liable for a mother and her baby. Why would they change something that they feel works? But now that they know something else works, it's cheaper, it's more convenient, they can't go back. So that's why COVID really helped. It really helped to break that mindset. And it was a real boon because our market size grew by a multiple, I would say, in terms of the doctors who believed, the patients who believed. So yes, it was an unfortunate event that led to good consequences for Biorithm, good outcomes for Biorithm. So
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely congratulations on that. I was also thinking like, definitely like that was an amazing kind of opportunity in an unfortunate sense. Yeah, but like now that you're kind of like growing in Singapore, do you have any like idea of like how you would continue to expand maybe in the Southeast Asian region or even abroad in a sense?
So you brought up a very interesting word, digital health. And what digital health, where the space it plays in is between healthcare technologies and consumer technologies. And it sort of sits in a nice gray area because
Yeah.
it is light touch, it is high engagement with the patient, it is low cost because it's delivered on a mobile phone. It improves accessibility for patients who can't see a doctor, physically visit a doctor, seeing a doctor on their phone, being able to get a simple assessment. It's changed everything, right? And like I said, that mindset now has more people willing to adopt that. So in Singapore, we face one last hurdle, which we can do nothing about, is the fact that everyone's 20 minutes away from a hospital in Singapore. So it's the fact that we're so small dilutes the value of remote monitoring a little bit. It still applies to a group of women, and it still would apply to the cost. But the convenience factor the convenience value proposition may be a bit diluted in Singapore. But that's why we've got to focus in other countries, right? Look at Australia and UK. Australia has huge geographical distances that patients need to cover to see the specialist doctors in the city centre. The UK has massive financial constraints on their National Health Service. The US is at the mercy of consumer behavior, and the consumers are demanding more convenient care. So Southeast Asia is a great region for maybe not so much the wearable, the distribution of hardware, which would raise the cost of care, but finding a model that works for them. So, almost looking at it from the perspective that not everyone may need fetal heart rate monitoring, because you need a doctor to interpret that. You need an ecosystem around that. But what women in Southeast Asia may need is a trigger to go to the doctor. So would they need a fetal kick counter, for example, which is a very simple way, a rather rudimentary way of determining fetal health, but still better than nothing. So it's about redesigning or sort of crafting the solution for the population. And that's why our solution looks very different in Australia, UK, US than it would in Southeast Asia, because of the nature of the population, the way it grows, and just the way it thinks about how healthcare is delivered. So we see huge growth opportunities for our digital health platform in Southeast Asia. And for our device play, it will be more Australia, UK, US.
Yeah, I think you brought a very important point as well. I think it's really about localizing the solution to the cultural context and, kind of mindsets of your patients and your target profile that you're kind of targeting with your solution. And I think that's something that, all our groups will also have to consider, especially when they kind of thinking about moving their solution from Singapore and even going global with that. Yeah. And so I think this has been a really, really enriching discussion. I think I've learned really so much from talking to you about your company and how you are growing even in the midst of this uncertain times. And I think I think we have one question from the floor from Qi Huang. So let me just show you on stage. So he actually wanted to know if you adopted a B2B or B2C model when you launched.
Yeah, so we are a B2B company. And we are looking to augment care that is delivered through the providers. And we made a very conscious decision around this because we wanted to start with the stakeholder whom the patients trusted the most, who would be the midwives or the doctors. And the service delivered through them has so much more weight than a service engaged by the patient herself. And so it's utilized by all the parties around. And, like I mentioned earlier, the motivations need to be aligned. If a patient uses a service herself, it may not be clinically utilized as much. The doctors may not place so much weight on it. But if a clinician suggests a service to a patient and it's fully integrated into the style of care, that's when you get it fully utilized and you see the maximum benefits for us in this case. So that's why we went B2B that's why we went B2B.
I see. Okay, we have a follow-up question from him as well. So I think we kind of talked about it as well. I think we talked about, convincing the stakeholders, but maybe you could share with us a bit more detail of, you talked about also breaking the kind of psyche, the mental barrier in a sense. So is there anything else you want to add about this in terms of when you first launched your product? Was it a very difficult process? Yeah.
So you convince the stakeholders. It's all about stakeholder management and key opinion leader management. And like I said, you bring the key opinion leaders along for the journey with you. And that's how they learn about options available in technology, what can be done. That's how they learn about patient gaps that they never knew about, right? Because we speak to the patients with a different intention than they do. So it's about bringing the key opinion leaders on that journey with us. And that's how we convince our stakeholders. And that's how we find our unaddressed gaps as well. Because when it's collaborative, you see things from a 360-degree perspective. So you have the best chance of capturing all your blind spots and gaps. So key opinion leaders, midwives, patients, as well as, IT personnel, biomedical engineers. It's a collaborative effort, and that's how they get convinced, and that's why they feel they're part of the solution. Our key opinion leaders feel that this is as much their solution as it is ours, and that's why they are so determined to use it. That's why they want to use it. They're pushing us to get it out faster and faster, so they can try it out. So yeah, it's about giving people a sense of ownership into the platform.
Yeah, I think like that last point that you made as well in terms of like, giving people that sense of ownership, I think is definitely a challenge for our teams as well. Being able to kind of build that solution to be able to give all the stakeholders kind of that ownership of it. Yeah, and so I think like, I just want to end off this session here because I'm mindful of the time. With just one last question, maybe
Sure.
I mean, we could give our participants here maybe like one piece of advice, like what would you tell them as like aspiring student healthcare entrepreneurs?
I would say the road ahead is hard, but it would be one that is unlike any other career pathway, actually. It's such a ride. And, I know people who have gone through the traditional conventional careers, and entrepreneurship is not for everyone. And, you shouldn't have to feel bad about not wanting to do it. But for those of you who want to do it, I would say go for it. Jump in with both feet. Main thing, be sure you can take care of your family as well. So make sure you can put food on the table and take care of your family. Don't don't ignore the people around you. It's very easy to. So commit fully to what you're doing, but take care of those around you because they will be your support system when times get hard. So yeah, that's the one piece of advice I can give.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amrish, for sharing your story about your company and really your personal anecdotes as well. I strongly believe that all participants would really have benefited from your sharing. And so I just want to thank everyone for attending our session. And so we'll kind of be bringing it to a close right here. Yeah. So I just want to thank Amrish again and thank all participants for coming. I hope you have a great evening ahead.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks
so much.
for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.